My dad told me I wasn't invited to Thanksgiving. When I asked why, my mom hesitated, then said, "Your brother's bringing his girlfriend. He says, your blue-collar job would embarrass him. He doesn't want people to think you're related." I stood there, holding a pie I'd baked for them, still warm in my hands. She looked at it, then looked away. "This is no place for people like you." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just said, "I understand." 5 days later, they showed up at my door, panicked, furious, demanding answers. Turns out, my brother's perfect girlfriend wasn't who she said she was. And I wasn't who they thought I was either. Hi, my name is Asher, Kane. I used to think silence was the safest place to live, that if I stayed quiet, maybe they'd leave me a little dignity. But what they took instead was everything else. I'm about to share something close to my heart. But before I do, can you say hi in the comments? Or tell me where you're from? I love hearing how far my story can reach. It's always good to know I'm not alone in this. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. And if this story touches something in you, or reminds you of someone who's ever felt cast aside, please consider subscribing. It means more than you know, to be heard, even once. Disregarding of November, late afternoon. The light outside had taken on that soft golden hue that only came during the tail end of fall in Asheville. Through my living room window, I could see the last of the red leaves floating down onto the yard, collecting on the hood of my old Chevy pickup, like nature's quiet goodbye. Inside, the fireplace crackled low, casting flickers of orange across the brick wall. The house smelled faintly of cedar and old books, familiar, grounding. I sat at the wooden coffee table, folding the last corner of the paper around the box I'd been working on for days. Inside was a soft, hand-knit scarf I'd made for my mom, light gray with deep blue edges, the same shade as her eyes when she was happy. Alongside it, I'd tucked an old first edition of The History of American Football I'd found at a used bookstore downtown. It still had the yellowed price tag on the inside cover. My dad would love it, I was sure. I ran my hand along the edge of the box, smoothing the twine I'd tied in a cross. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest, like everything else in my life. With the box sitting neatly on the table, I picked up my phone and dialed the number I knew by heart. The line rang twice before Mom answered. Constrained, "Hello?" she said, her voice breathy like she hadn't expected me to call. Trying to sound casual. "Just wanted to check what time I should swing by on Thursday. I've got something for you and Dad." There was a pause, too long to miss. "Asher?" she began, and my stomach already knew. "I think it's best if you don't come this year." Silence clamped around me like cold steel. "Is everything okay?" I asked slowly. "It's just... Gideon wants the dinner to go smoothly. It's important to him. He's introducing someone special and..." I waited. She sighed. "He said he didn't want you there. Said your line of work doesn't exactly fit the image. He called it not a place for losers." I nodded to myself. My voice came out steady, far steadier than I felt. "I understand." "I'm sorry," she whispered, but I could tell she wasn't sorry for what had been said, only that I'd heard it. I ended the call. The room suddenly felt colder. I stared at the box on the table. The twine looked too neat, too optimistic now. I reached for my coffee mug and took a sip. Black. Bitter. Still warm. Outside, the last red leaf on the maple branch fluttered, then let go. As I sat down on the edge of the couch and looked at the fire, now a dim bed of embers. There was no anger, just a still ache settling in my chest, the kind that made you wish you hadn't hoped in the first place. I took a walk the next morning, boots crunching over a path of half-frozen leaves behind my house. The trail led into the woods, the same stretch of trees I used to wander as a kid when the world inside the house felt too loud, too sharp. There was a hill behind the old barn, At the top stood a gnarled apple tree, long since overgrown but still standing. I hadn't been up there in years. I stopped at the base of it now, shoving my hands into the pockets of my flannel. The bark was cracked, the branches half bare. A single bruised apple lay in the grass near the roots. When we were kids, Gideon and I used to climb this very tree. He was always faster, bolder, louder. He'd reach the best apples at the top while I waited below, picking through the ones that had already fallen. I'd tell myself they tasted just as sweet, but I knew they didn't. It had always been like that. Gideon got the new clothes, the private music lessons, the robotics camp one summer while I stayed home and helped Dad repaint the fence. Mom used to say, "He's got potential, that one. You can't teach charm like that." Then she'd turn to me and ask, "Why don't you try something bigger, Asher? Don't you want more?" And Dad? He didn't say much, but he didn't need to. The look he gave me the day I said I wanted to be a plumber said it all. Disappointment cloaked in polite silence. But I stuck with it. I went to trade school, I got my license, I built my own client list. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Then came the twist I never told anyone. When Gideon got into college, he bragged about the scholarship he landed, how he'd done it all himself. But the truth was, he hadn't. I'd slipped $2,000 from my savings into his tuition account during his first semester. No one ever noticed. No one ever asked. At his graduation party, Mom gave a toast about how proud she was of Gideon's independence. Dad clapped him on the back like he was the next Kennedy. They never mentioned me. I remember standing in the back of the yard holding a plastic cup of warm punch, wondering how I could feel like a stranger in my own family. A year later, I drafted a business plan. It wasn't flashy, just a simple proposal to expand my services, bring on an apprentice, maybe invest in a small workshop downtown. I showed it to Dad. He read half a page, handed it back and said, "Don't overreach, Asher. You're not really built to run things." I folded the paper and never showed it to anyone again. Now, staring up at the crooked limbs of the apple tree, I realized something. I'd been climbing the same tree my whole life, just on the wrong side. No matter how high I reached, the good fruit was always picked before I got there. I headed back down the hill, the wind cutting through my jacket. My breath came out in clouds. Back in the garage, I sat in the truck, closed the door, and just sat in silence. No radio, no engine, just me and the air. I wasn't shocked that Gideon didn't want me at dinner. I was just surprised they finally said it out loud. They'd always left me out. This year, they just stopped pretending. And somehow that hurt more. 8 years ago, I was just a guy with calloused hands and a wrench in my back pocket, working odd plumbing jobs across the city. One afternoon, I got called to a leaky office sink in a cramped financial firm downtown. That's when I first met Sage. She was wearing glasses too big for her face, her hair in a loose braid, flipping through a spreadsheet. She looked up, offered a tight smile, and said, "Don't worry about the mess. I've been dealing with leaks in the numbers all morning." No disgust when I wiped oil on my jeans. No backhanded, "Why didn't you go to college?" Just curiosity. After that, she started inviting me for coffee downstairs after work. Not in a flirty way, more like she genuinely wanted to know who I was, where I came from, what I dreamed of. No one had ever asked before. Most people looked at me and saw a trade. She looked and saw a person. One day, over bitter black coffee and a stale blueberry muffin, I told her I didn't have some grand plan. I just wanted something steady. Not rich, not famous, just safe. She nodded. Then start small. Buy a piece of something that grows. She talked about compound interest like it was magic. Helped me set up a brokerage account. Walked me through ETFs, REITs, the S&P 500. She told me not to check it every day. Just water it like a plant and leave it alone. So I did. I started with $300, then $500. Sometimes I could only put in $20. But over time, with patience and 1,000 little sacrifices, no vacations, no new trucks, no nights out, I built something real. My net worth climbed from spare change to 7 figures. But I made one thing clear to Sage early on. I don't want anyone to know, especially not my family. I remember her blinking, surprised. Not even your parents? Undermine not them, I said. They only ask about money when they think it's their business. She didn't press, just nodded. Okay, it's our secret. And she kept it, for years. Until a month before Thanksgiving. I was scrolling mindlessly on my phone during lunch break when I saw it. Sage and Gideon, dressed to the nines, seated in a plush booth at Ponce's Steakhouse. A place I could afford now, but never set foot in. She was laughing at something he said. His hand rested on the small of her back. The photo was tagged by Clara, my sister, who always had a flair for performance. I stared at it for a long time. Was it betrayal? Not quite. We weren't dating. We never had been. But it hit me like a punch to the chest. Not because I was jealous, okay, maybe a little, but because Gideon had a way of unearthing secrets, and Sage knew mine. I spent days battling it internally. Should I text her? Ask what was going on? Should I cut her off entirely or pretend I didn't care? But every time I almost hit send, I'd remember her voice, low and steady. Asher, now you don't have to prove anything. Your value isn't in your shoes or your job title. I said nothing, just waited. I pulled out the worn notebook where I tracked every deposit and dividend. Flipping through it felt like reading a journal of my past 8 years, every number a milestone I never shared with anyone. The next time I saw her, a week before the holiday, we didn't talk about the photo. She smiled at me like she always had, but something sat heavy between us. And couldn't stop thinking. If she stood beside Gideon now, what side would she choose? Thanksgiving night, I sat in my tiny apartment with the fireplace flickering low and a mug of black coffee cooling in my hands. Outside, every window on my block glowed with life. Families eating, kids laughing, songs playing softly beneath the hum of conversation. I imagined the table at my parents' house, roasted turkey, cranberry sauce, Clara's oversalted green beans, laughter bouncing off the old chandelier, and in the one empty seat, mine, an absence nobody mourned. I didn't expect Sage to show up the next day, but she did, knocked softly, her eyes rimmed red. I need to tell you what happened last night, she said. I let her in, wordless. She sat on the edge of the worn armchair like it might burn her. It started normal, wine, jokes. Clara made her speech. Then Gideon stood up with a champagne glass and said, "Meet Sage, my girlfriend." The perfect match for the kind of legacy our family represents. I stared at the floor. The fireplace crackled, but I felt cold. She swallowed. Then he said you'd probably ruin the vibe if you came, that you were probably stuck in a sewer somewhere. Everyone laughed. Punishments tightened around the mug. She glanced at me. Your mom didn't say anything, just smirked. Your dad, quiet as always. Then Clara chimed in. Asher chose his path. No one forced him to live like that. I didn't flinch, but inside I folded. I knew they didn't think much of me, but to say it out loud in front of her, I couldn't sit through it, she said. I stood up. I looked at her now, really looked. Her hands were shaking. I told them they were wrong, she continued, that you weren't low or pitiful or beneath anyone, that you were the most consistent, decent, hardworking person I'd ever met, and that your investment portfolio was probably more impressive than any of theirs. I told them you weren't there because they didn't deserve you. Silence bloomed. I couldn't speak. She blinked fast. I know I broke your trust. I'm sorry. I should have kept the secret. But I couldn't let them spit on you like that. I wanted to be furious. I wanted to yell. But all I could think about was the way her voice must have cut through that room, the silence that probably followed, the look on Gideon's face. I finally said, "Do you regret saying it?" She met my eyes. No, but I think it changed things. Now they know, and they're not going to apologize. They're going to come crawling smiling like they're proud of you. And really, I finished, they'll want a piece. She nodded. I stepped out onto the porch that night. The sky was ink black, stars pinpricking the cold air. I'd spent years working in silence, building a life from scratch. Now, all it took was one dinner I didn't attend for the whole thing to shatter. Not the money, not the truth, the illusion that maybe, just maybe, I could belong without paying a price. But that illusion was gone now, and I was finally free. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, 5 days after Thanksgiving. I was under my truck, changing the oil, the gravel cold beneath my back, when the familiar crunch of luxury tires rolled up my driveway. I wiped my hands on a rag and sat up. There it was, Gideon's sleek black BMW, shining with arrogance, parked right up against the wooden fence I had built with my own hands. The doors opened in sequence like a scene from a play they'd rehearsed, my brother adjusting his cufflinks, Clara smoothing out her designer coat, and Leonard trailing behind, eyes scanning the land like he was sizing up a development property. Not a smile, not a hello, not even a how are you. Gideon spoke first. So you're good at investing, huh? Real impressive keeping that from us. Bit selfish, don't you think? Clara didn't wait a beat. Families share blessings. This is the time to collaborate. Leonard chimed in, his tone too rehearsed. Let's not make things difficult, Asher. We're here in good faith. Not a single one of them asked how I'd been, how I'd managed, or if I needed anything. All I heard were phrases like portfolio, opportunity, retirement strategy. Their eyes didn't see me. They saw the digits next to my name. Then Gideon reached into his coat and pulled out a thick folder. I've drawn up a proposal. You bring the capital, I bring the network. We could really scale this. I took the folder, barely glanced inside. Legal jargon and percentages. Vague projections. Zero soul. I looked him straight in the eye. And if I had no money? Gideon didn't flinch. Then I guess you'd still be under that truck, patching pipes while it rains. I turned toward the house, ready to walk away, when Mom stepped forward. We didn't come to fight. Let's remember, we're family. We've overcome so much before. I cut her off. Mom, you spent 20 years wishing I'd disappear. You looked at me like I was the dust under Gideon's shoes. I stopped trying to please you the day I realized your love had terms. Clara's voice cracked. We didn't come for this. We came to support you. I faced her. No. You came for numbers, for access. I'm not a stock to be leveraged. I'm your brother, and you never cared until I became profitable. Gideon's temper finally snapped. Don't be a fool. You think you're invincible now? Keep pushing us, and you'll find out what it feels like when the whole world stops believing in you. Leonard sighed, grabbed Clara's elbow. He's always been like this, he muttered as he turned to go. Clara's eyes filled with tears. You're tearing this family apart. I opened the front door and pointed to the driveway. If you came here from money, and not from me, then consider me no longer part of the story you keep rewriting. They didn't argue. The door clicked shut behind them. Their steps faded into the gravel, replaced by a silence so thick it rang in my ears. In that quiet, I stood still, hand on the doorknob, feeling something hollow and enormous peel away inside me. For the first time, I was no longer the son trying to be accepted. I was simply free. And suddenly, that freedom felt heavier than chains. 2 weeks later, I got a message from a former client. Hey Zeph, you okay? Just saw what Gideon posted. My gut clenched before I even opened the app. There it was, a long post, filled with polished outrage and curated sincerity. A photo of me in work clothes, hands smudged with grease, taken without my knowledge. Gideon's caption read, Safeguard who you trust. Some hide behind toolboxes and blue-collar charm. Not every dollar is clean. Not every brother is honest. Underneath it, unsent 100 money, turbulence, Hashtag betrayed by blood. Mar in hours, local forums in Asheville picked it up. Whispers turned into comments, comments into posts, posts into threads. In his next post, Gideon got bolder. He hinted that I had ties to questionable sources of capital, claiming my investment success came suspiciously fast and with no clear explanation. He suggested I'd been laundering money through renovations. The damage was swift. 3 longtime clients canceled upcoming work. One of the biggest contracting partners I'd worked with for years emailed to pause all collaboration pending further review. When I walked into the corner grocery store, the woman who used to slip me free apples didn't even meet my eyes. She rang up my items wordlessly. A childhood friend texted, "I don't think it's true, but it's messy. I can't get involved. Hope you understand." I stared at that message longer than I should have, because I did understand. That's what hurt. Then came the calls from my mother. She sobbed over the line. "Zeph, why won't you just apologize to Gideon? He's hurting too. If you share a little, all this can calm down." She called it peace. I called it a payoff. Then a letter came from Dad, handwritten, 3 pages, double-spaced. "You're destroying the values this family stands for. Reputation matters. If you keep this up, we'll all fall with you." Not once did he ask how I was doing, if I was safe, if the lies were costing me more than work. I sat in the garage that night, alone under the flickering fluorescent light. The cold bled through the concrete into my spine. I stared at the for sale sign I had half written for the house, folded it, unfolded it. Turbulence to the truck beside me. Maybe it's time to leave Asheville. Start somewhere no one knows the name, Asher, Kane. Next door, Christmas lights blinked on, warm and rhythmic. My house remained dark, silent. I wasn't losing because I'd made mistakes. I was losing because no one had stayed long enough to see the truth of me, except myself. Maybe that would have to be enough. I got her text at 9:03 a.m. "Meet me at Patton Cafe, I think you need to hear this." No emojis, no explanations, just sage. By the time I got there, the cafe was nearly empty. I slid into the booth, flannel jacket still clinging to the chill of October. I hadn't shaved in days, and the iced coffee in front of me had long lost its bite. I just sat there, like me, flat, bitter, unfinished. Sage was already waiting, her hair tied back, face pale but composed. She didn't ask how I'd been. Instead, she leaned forward and said, "Gideon hired a lawyer. I found out through an old colleague who still works at his firm. They're building a case alleging you're laundering money." I didn't speak. Not because I was guilty, but because I knew how truth works around here. Slow, quiet, easily drowned by louder lies. "They're reviewing old bank statements, trying to frame your investments as illegal, shell company nonsense, offshore accounts." I closed my eyes. "He's spinning your silence into guilt," she said softly. I let out a bitter laugh. Of course he is. That's what Gideon does. He weaponizes doubt. Sage looked at me for a long moment. Then she reached into her tote and pulled out a legal pad. "I can help. Let me audit your files. I'll draft a full report. No one knows financial structures in this county better than I do. We can prove every cent is clean." I shook my head. "No." Her brow furrowed. "Why?" "Because if you step into this, they'll come after you too. Your name, your job, everything you've built. I won't let that happen." "I'm afraid?" "I think you deserve better than being dragged through the mud just for standing next to me." Her voice broke slightly. "You're doing this for me, or because you think I won't stay once things get hard." I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "You deserve someone this town respects, not someone they call a con man behind his back." She didn't cry. She just looked tired. I stood up. My coffee was still full, untouched. We ended up walking along the French Broad River. The sky was gray, water choppy. The bench we used to sit on was slick with rain. I stopped and turned toward her. I've tried to live honestly, quietly, but maybe that was never enough. Maybe the truth doesn't win unless you shout it. And I was never good at shouting. Sage said nothing. Not a hug, not a goodbye. Just two people parting, one step at a time, until there was nothing left to say. That night, I went home and opened the safe. Pulled out every folder, every notarized record, every receipt from the past 5 years. Spread them across the table, and whispered to myself, "Prove it or vanish." The knock came early, 7:10 a.m., Monday morning. Not frantic, not desperate. That kind of knock that tells you the person on the other side has done this before. Priye opened the door to two officers in uniform, eyes clear and cold. "Asher Kane?" the taller one asked. "Yes. We need to ask you a few questions regarding your assets and financial records." I nodded. "Come in." The living room was half lit by weak morning sun. Papers were still scattered across the table from last night's storm of anxiety. One officer read aloud from a printed document. "Court-authorized request to review transactions related to the Kane estate, dated within the past 6 years. Allegations of financial impropriety have been submitted." My stomach dropped. But not from guilt. From the familiar weight of knowing someone is rewriting your story without asking you first. "I have all the documents. Everything's clean," I said. "Who filed the complaint?" They didn't answer. They didn't have to. Only one man stood to gain from my ruin, and he was good at hiding behind the right hands. By evening, the story had broken, so I turned on the TV just in time to catch the end of the 6 o'clock news. And there he was, Gideon, wearing a neatly pressed shirt, tie knotted just a little too tight, sitting across from a local reporter. "I loved my brother," he said, his voice cracking. "But after everything he's done, someone has to protect our family name." I watched him force a tear, then another. "I just want the truth. I believe in forgiveness, but there has to be accountability." The comments online were a mix of rage and sympathy. Half the town called me a coward. The other half called me misunderstood. No one called to ask how I felt. I sat in the dark, surrounded by files, by years of effort and quiet dignity, now questioned by a smirking face on television. My hands trembled. Then I remembered Sage's words. "If you don't stand up and speak, they'll write the ending for you." I sat up, grabbed the folders, sorted them, numbered them, typed an email. Subject: "If you're still willing, I need you. To Sage Mitchell." I hit send. Then I zipped the documents into my leather case, locked the house behind me, and got into my truck. In the rearview mirror, the house grew smaller. Ahead, courtrooms, headlines, eyes waiting to see if I would bend or break. I adjusted the mirror, kept driving. Let them look. They were about to learn who I really was. Sage and I sat quietly in her office that morning, the air still carrying a trace of midnight. On the desk between us were neatly stacked folders, labeled and color-coded, filled with months of financial documents, bank statements, investment contracts, transaction reports, and tax invoices. She'd been up all night organizing them. "Everything's here," she said, sliding the top folder toward me. "We're going to fight this through the law. You won't go down for what someone else did." I nodded, voice barely a murmur. "Thank you for staying." Her eyes didn't soften. She wasn't doing this out of pity. Sage fought for what she believed in, and for some reason she believed in me. By noon, her legal counsel, an experienced state-level attorney with sharp instincts, had filed a counter motion, with both the local court and the police department. The file included a formal request to launch an inquiry into Gideon's motives for pressing the charges against me. The real blow came with the annexed evidence. Gideon had been using company marketing funds for personal luxuries, first-class tickets to Cabo, a Rolex with his initials engraved on the back, and suspicious wire transfers labeled vendor consulting, which led to a personal PayPal account. His expense reports had been doctored for over 2 years with digital trails left carelessly behind. The company moved swiftly. HR terminated his employment under cause, freezing all outgoing payments tied to his name. Legal sent a cease and desist.
The irony? His accusations had triggered the audit that uncovered his own fraud. Meanwhile, Sage, never one to stay quiet when truth needed a platform, shared the story of my journey at a local community finance conference. She didn't mention names. She didn't need to. Her words were precise. Some of us build wealth the hard way, with hands, patience, and dignity, and when they come for you, you stand. She made its way online. I didn't even know it had been recorded. But within 2 days, I began receiving messages. People I hadn't heard from in years. Clients from my repair business asking to be added back to the schedule. A retired professor mailed me a letter handwritten. You reminded me what integrity looks like. The tide had turned. When we stood before the judge for the preliminary hearing, he flipped through the paperwork, set the file aside, and said, "There is no criminal basis for proceeding against Mr. Asher Kane. The court sees no fraud, only a poorly handled investment by a third party." The courthouse, I paused on the steps. The sky was pale with early spring, and the light rested on my shoulders the way it hadn't in years. Not heavy, not demanding, just light. That evening, Gideon showed up outside my gate. He looked like a man who'd run out of places to be angry. "I messed up," he said quietly. "I just wanted to be seen." I didn't open the gate. I handed him a sealed envelope through the iron bars. My handwriting was clean, no anger in the loops. "I don't hate you, but I don't have space in my life for people who only knock when they want something." He stood there for a while, then walked away. Sage stood behind me, her hand finding mine without a word. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain who I was to anyone. I already knew. 1 year later, in the blush of autumn, I married Sage. We chose a small hillside chapel, old and cedar-scented. Nothing extravagant, just white chrysanthemums tied to pews with twine and garlands of pine across the altar. It was peaceful, intimate. Our guest list was short. Milo, the thrift store owner who lent me tools when I couldn't afford my own. Lila, a retired teacher who'd brought her cracked heirloom lamp for repair. A few of Sage's colleagues, all sharp minds and kind eyes. In the front row, 3 seats remained empty. One for my father, one for my mother, one for the brother who once called me worthless. None of them came. A week before the ceremony, I'd received a letter, no return address, but the script was unmistakable, my mother's. "I won't come, I don't deserve to, but if one day you find space in your heart to forgive, I'll still be here, waiting." I didn't reply. Not that I get it too. After the wedding, Sage and I moved into a modest 2-story house just outside Asheville, with a creaky porch and a small backyard. I planted an apple tree from seeds I'd saved as a boy, picked from the old tree behind my parents' house. A symbol, maybe. Or just something to tend to with my hands. I still drove my old truck, still wore flannel, still drank black coffee from a chipped mug. For the first time, there was no aching silence in my mornings, just stillness. 6 months after his court-ordered probation ended, Gideon sent a message, just one. "You were right, I lost everything, but I found myself in the rubble." I read it once. I didn't answer. Not because I held a grudge, but because I'd learned that not every relationship needs a resolution. Some truths settle best in silence. One morning, Sage and I stood by the kitchen window. The apple tree had bloomed,
5 pale pink flowers trembling in the breeze.
Peace, I rested my hand on the sill and said, "You're the family I was always searching for."
She smiled, leaning into my shoulder. "And you're home, Asher." No applause, no audience. Just coffee brewing in the kitchen, and the quiet certainty that we had made it to the other side, on our own terms.